Mage 40K, Episode 2. The Power of Swords and Violence. That's where the money is. Our merry band of lunatic RPG players turned mages, having been shanghaied into a variant of the Warhammer 40K universe by the Emperor of Man, and ordered to fix the universe, found ourselves on a shuttle bound for the inquisitorial vessel O Imperator Quare. Some quick linguistic parsing determined this to be a bad Latin translation of O Emperor Why. A solid question, but a less than auspicious name for a ship. We took it as either a sign of idiocy or dark cynicism on the part of the owners, and wondered which we were in for. Once we boarded and met the Inquisitor, we had our answer. We came down the ramp to see a large, heavily muscled, grumpy-looking man of distinct military bearing. He was glowering at us with ill-concealed distaste, as were the rest of his staff standing behind him. One of them, a skinny, twitchy-looking fellow with wild eyes and a permanent 1,000-yard stare, was actively being restrained by a small, unpleasant, grubby fellow, and a taller medic as he quietly but audibly argued for blowing up the stupid all-psyker party before they get us all killed! After a few moments of this, the large leader growled at him to shut up, that it was a personal order from the Emperor, and there was no getting out of it. The twitchy guy was more subdued, if not exactly calm, and Inquisitor Greg Sargent turned to address the rest of us. Bard and Weeb, the true fanboys, squealed in delight until Sarge gave them a weird look. He introduced his comrades as his retinue, the demolitions man Twitch, the supply agent Nubby, the medic Doc, the techie Tink, and his second-in-command interrogator Almy, who we were instructed to call Interrogator von Humperdinck. He also introduced Jim and Hannah, the ship's engine seers, the ship's doctor, Sister Valerie, and a wrinkled old lady who we were informed was the diplomacy and intelligence officer, and the ship's captain, Captain Peter Peachfuzz, and several other individuals necessary to the smooth running of a ship. We were then informed, in no uncertain terms, that although technically only competence was in the direct chain of command, and although she did have inquisitorial authority granted by the Emperor himself, Sarge still considered us to be a bunch of dangerously unstable psychers, even worse than the regular kind, and liable to get everyone on the ship messily devoured by demons. Or maybe just spontaneously explode by ourselves, if he was very lucky. Based on this, he said, every one of us was to be considered subordinate to everyone not only on his team, but on the entire ship's crew. Even the servitors outranked us as far as he was concerned, although special care was made to point out that we should still not take any orders from Nubby or Twitch outside of actual combat, and that if we in any way endangered or inconvenienced any of his people, we would find ourselves scheduled for spontaneous explosion. It was a bit disheartening to meet your heroes and find out that they hated you on principle, but once we got settled, Weeb and Bard regaled the rest of the group with some of the adventures of the All Guards party, and we quickly agreed that they had a fairly valid worldview. With the introductions out of the way, we were on our way to Tau Space. The voyage took a few months of warp travel, which were helpfully filled by Sarge and his team introducing us to the joys of boot camp. There was a great deal of bitching from the flabbier, nerdier contingents of our party, but it was helpfully pointed out that we would soon be running around actual battlefields with actual people shooting actual guns at us, so maybe some calisthenics and firearms training were in order. This shut everyone, by which I mean Bard, up, and we grudgingly got in decent shape. The intensive parts of basic training only lasted a month or so, however, after which we did morning drills and had afternoons to train in our own unique ways. This mostly meant being shunted to the deepest bowels of the ship, where we could practice our magic without endangering any delicate equipment or real people, as Tink tactfully put it. It was pretty easy to get our own space. The vessel wasn't large by Imperial standards, but Imperial standards are on the scale of miles, so it was only the size of a moderate town instead of a city. Plus, we had inquisitorial, or interrogatorial, power to kick people out. And we were a bunch of psychers. We just walked into a bay and told the inhabitants, "You can stay if you want, but we're going to hang out in here and do psychic shit. Your choice." And we quickly had our own inviolable domain. The only real exception was Bard, who was doing his best to communicate with the spirit world on behalf of several of our party who dabbled in that sphere. This was a very stupid thing to do in the warp, but Bard was an experienced mage and, more importantly, not a total moron, so he didn't just try this in his quarters. Instead, He went to the shipboard chapel and got a bevy of priests and clerics to stand around him chanting prayers, burning incense, and holding heavy clubs to beat him into unconsciousness if he got possessed by anything. Which, inevitably, he did. But it was nothing major, and he got the hang of actually navigating to his multiversal spirits after only 3 or 4 trips to the infirmary. Also, several of the party recorded these sessions and edited the best parts together to the tune of yakety sax, and distributed it around the ship, which went some way to endearing us to our new colleagues. If you're wondering why the rest of the party allowed Bard to try this stupidity, seeing as we had the barest knowledge whatsoever of 40K, several of us had cunning plans to affect the universe that relied on access to other universes. So his soul and sanity were a risk all of us, including Bard, were willing to take. On the plus side, we did get transversal internet access, so bonus. Alongside that, we did our best to make ourselves likable and get past the somewhat reasonable prejudice everyone had against psychers. Heck, only a handful of our party dabbled in things that would involve the warp. We were pretty sure. Things like forces or life or mind would be immune to demonic shenanigans. We argued. We had dealt with personifications of abstract mystical forces before and had been just fine. We rationalized. But regardless, we did our best to make nice with the guards and the rest of the crew. That guy laid on the charm. Weeb shared his medical knowledge with Doc. Bard shared his stash with Nubby. Mills, Welshie, and Critical, piggybacking on Bard's efforts to reach across the multiversal divide, managed to get internet access on their phones and shared anime with Tink. Competence shared tactics and complaints of lunatic idiot underlings with Almi. None of us shared anything with Twitch, because he locked himself in his cabin and threatened to blow the corridor anytime we tried to approach. But you can't win them all. But, by and large, our efforts were met with positive reactions, and the leadership of the ship moved from outright hostile to simply suspicious over the course of the trip. Basically, we were able to convince them that we were insane, dangerous, and insanely dangerous, but were rarely a direct hazard to teammates. Just innocent bystanders and any larger concepts of decency. The last thing we did was research, spending as much time as possible in the ship's onboard librarium to figure out how technology, politics, and everything else actually worked in this universe. Well, most of us did. Bard mostly hung out with Sister Ginny, the research librarian sororitas who ran the place, and tried to flirt. It didn't help matters that on one occasion a passing cleric heard his stammering and awkwardness, confused it for possession, and started hammering on him with a book of Holy Writ. But Sister Ginny found that amusing, so it worked out. But all in all, our trip was very productive, and we reached Tau Space ready for action. Or rather, we reached the border world slightly outside of Tau Space. You see, rather than actually deal directly with the alien empire, we had been directed to shift the balance of power in a small border world. If we did our jobs right, our actions would allow local inquisitorial agents to make certain moves that, over the course of the next few decades, should lead to a snowballing movement of support in the Tau Seps for joining the Imperium against the various menaces of the galaxy. We thought it sounded a little suspicious, especially the part about Imperial Guardsmen being greeted with flowers and open arms, but it had been planned by the Emperor himself, so no one was actually allowed to argue. Also, he tended to win at these things, because he tended to cheat. So we determined to go along with it and do our part. This particular border world had Imperial and Tau influences, favoring the Imperium to a moderate extent after some activities by Sarge not too long ago. As a result, a Tau diplomatic corps had been sent on a goodwill tour, including, for some unbelievable reason, one of their spooky, mind-controlling leadership caste, an ethereal named Aunanoff. Our assignment was to set up some way of meeting and suborning, through fair means or foul, this ethereal, as the first domino in the Emperor's ingenious plan. We were also instructed to influence the locals, human and especially Tau, into the Imperial way of thinking as much as possible, i.e., learn to stab things. Our shuttle took us to the offices of General Lars Weeaboo, a large man with a ferocious neckbeard, who identified himself as the local planetary security officer. For those of us who didn't already know, he also stated that he was a retired Inquisition and knew about our mission. He provided the briefing material on where the Ethereal and its entourage would be based during their several months in system, in and around the Governor's Palace, along with a schedule of public appearances and some detailed maps of local sites of interest and public meeting spaces where such events were planned or likely to occur. Weeaboo also informed us that while most of the members of this goodwill tour were politicians and public affairs agents, the head of the Tau security was the Firecast warrior, O'Shaughnessy. When someone asked about the name, we were helpfully informed that the O was a Tau rank approximating field commander. Anyway, the rest of the party were apparently a bit of a joke, but O'Shaughnessy was to be taken seriously. We thanked Weeaboo for the information, said we would contact him if we needed further assistance, and set off into the town to establish our base. Seeing as the guards were officially uninvited from ever returning to the planet, we were pretty much on our own. Out on the town with a government credit card and no supervision. Woohoo! Well, actually, all of our party members are getting a little older, so it was less wild parties and more outrageously expensive meals. But still, a good time was had as we found a storefront to set our operations in. We needed a storefront so we could start our small business, because we had a cunning plan. You see, we knew from our interactions with the guard that there was a Tau equivalent of anime, something with which our incredibly nerdy party was intimately familiar. I mean, the guy's name was Weeb, for God's sake. Also, we knew that the border worlds, if not necessarily the Sept worlds themselves, were willing to watch shows featuring humans and even space marines, which would necessitate some form of anime-style melee violence. If we could introduce the right anime and manga, mystically enhanced by mind magic and a few rewrites to fit the universe, we could probably spread the idea of swords are cool and add some bayonets to things to the local system, and with the right business deals, we could export it to the whole Tau race. Cultural warfare for the win. Plus, we didn't even have to do much searching for the anime. We hadn't planned for this in any way beforehand, but because of who we are as people, fully half of our party had several entire series on our phones. Not that the rest of us weren't colossal nerds, we just preferred hard copies and our books and DVDs were all back home. Our crew members with matter and other physical spheres also started producing prototypes for Nerf-like swords, chain and otherwise, to allow little Tau children to safely bop one another and spread our sinister message even further. We reached out to General Weeaboo, since he had been the one handling the Guardsman Party's Super Deserter Guevesa Action Squad, or whatever it was called. Had him hire a handful of translators and video editors to dub the series we thought would be most appealing to a Tauish thirst for violence, and scheduled a few free showings around the city. This was, however, a long-term secondary plan, and took a back seat to trying to figure out how to deal with the ethereal. The weirdest thing was, as we watched him and his retinue go about their business around the city, the planet, and the larger system, we noticed that they seemed incredibly unconcerned with security. Or rather, the Fire Warrior O'Shaughnessy and his people seemed to take security very seriously, but the ethereal and his direct hangers-on appeared fairly blasé. It was weird. You would think one of the ruling caste traveling outside his own territory, in a neutral zone bordered by an enormous, hostile, xenocidal enemy, would be a little more interested in keeping his skin intact, if not for the greater good of the Empire, then for personal reasons at least. But, whatever was going on, we figured our first best tactic was to get familiar with the area and the people. As part of this, one morning, not long after we had set up shop, that guy went out to sample the local cinema, as well as gauge the local security level. But he was a bit hampered by being him. You see, despite all the grief we gave him over anything and everything, that guy was a surprisingly personable, likable individual. Everyone liked him. The rest of us found it disgusting and hid our raging jealousy and sarcasm. The point is, when that guy walked up to a random, youngish Tau female and asked for directions to the local cinema, she told him that a great new rom-com was just starting and invited herself on a date with the confused mage. She was hot, and he had always admired Captain Kirk, so that guy just rolled with it and ended up enjoying the film. He wasn't able to give us a detailed report on the quality of uplifting series of romantic hijinks, or whatever it was, because of what happened about halfway through the show. He was sitting there, enjoying the movie and wondering what to do about the blue hand slowly creeping up his leg, when a black bag descended rapidly over his head, strong hands lifted him into a sack, and they began spiriting him away. Competence, Mills, and Welshie were puttering around our shop when Mills informed them she was sensing hostile minds somewhere nearby. The three moved cautiously into the back alley behind the storefronts, where our mind mage had pinpointed the feeling, but they couldn't see anything. For their part, Bard, Weeb, and Critical were just coming back from a trip to some sort of comics/anime/nerd shop, easily identifiable by the style of posters plastered over the window, because nerds are the same anywhere, when they turned the corner into the other side of the alley and spotted the rest of our party crouched behind the trash cans and looking around quickly. Mills shouted something about hostiles, and after the rest of the party joined them in cover, we determined that the foe, whoever they were indeed invisible. The bag that they were carrying, containing a struggling that guy, however, was not. We saw it float down the alley, and Weeb shouted out, "Stealth suits!" As it turns out, actual invisibility is not so effective against mages who know you're there, and have the ability to sense minds, souls, life force, or the electrical impulses in your synapses. Once we knew to look, no one in the party had any trouble telling where the sneaky gits were. This turned out not to be an issue, however. The novelty of being carried in a sack quickly wearing off, that guy decided he had had enough. In his best firm but fair dad voice, he stated, "All right, gentlemen, fun is fun, but I think this is enough. Put me down now." This might not have worked, but the blast of mind magic he empowered it with allowed his voice to hit the right harmonics, and he quickly found himself standing in the middle of the alleyway, a sack around his ankles, while an invisible hand gently brushed dirt off his lapel. We didn't know if it was innate Tau obedience or just that guy's particular charm, but it worked. Clearly confused, the Tau began quietly arguing with one another before first one and then another decloaked. The conflict clearly having entered a new phase, the rest of the party approached and started flashing various badges and saying, "Why, yes, we were Inquisition agents, but we were on vacation and the planetary officials knew about us already, so maybe this was a problem for someone higher up the food chain." Despite the hissed protestations of one of the pair, we were informed that they had been sent to acquire some sort of super psyker for, quote, interrogation by their boss. After some more conversation, and a bit of mystic influence, we convinced the hapless duo that, in fact, they had been ordered to bring the psychers to their boss for a discussion, and this could be achieved by asking politely and hiring a taxi. They even let that guy go back to the theater and arrange for a second date with the Tau lady, who turned out to be some sort of gray market engineer, with a thing for humans, apparently. We eventually made our way, somewhat more leisurely than truly necessary, to the governor's palace. Instead of dealing with the planetary governor or his guest the ethereal, however, we were escorted around to the back of the compound where stood a small complex of security offices. We were asked to wait in the lobby while our escorts reported to their boss. We figured he was not happy, based on the volume of alien shouting coming through the wall. The pair shuffled out of the office, and then a grumpy-looking fire warrior asked us to come in. Seriously, he was burly and angry enough to have been a blue version of Sarge. It was kind of endearing, and that guy tried to charm him into going easy on his subordinates. O'Shaughnessy didn't really buy Guy's vague excuses, but he did allow that we were, quote, too dangerous for those clowns to reasonably be expected to handle, so we called it a win. Without much more of an introduction, the warrior asked bluntly why the hell we were on this planet. We offered the vacation excuse, but he wasn't buying, countering with the argument that he had never heard of the Imperium, let alone the Inquisition, offering vacations. There was some hemming and hawing, then Competence decided that a half-truth would probably work better than a lie. She stated that we were officially on a fact-finding mission in the sector, but really we were big fans of an underground cartoon series about a bunch of deserter guardsmen and wanted to get our hands on the last season, and maybe make some copies to market and distribute on our own, back home, for lots of money. So basically we were using the vast, phenomenal power of the Inquisition to satisfy our petty personal whims and maybe enrich ourselves into the bargain. This he found more credible, even if he was pretty sure we were still lying about something just on general principle. But he was mollified enough to let us go without too much more trouble. As we were on our way out, Weeb suggested that he might punish the idiot duo by assigning them to watch us as we made marketing and distribution deals. This earned a smirk and the general approval of O'Shaughnessy, who pointed out that we were quite right in guessing he was going to have us watched. We countered that it would be weird if he didn't. This did not, alas, prove to be the last of the unprovoked interference. We were being careful and cautious, watching the ethereal's public movements as innocuously as possible, while we worked on advancing Plan Animus. It had actually grown to occupy most of our time, since talking about anime was a lot more fun than stakeouts, and that guy's new girlfriend got us a good deal on drones for that anyway. So we spent our time making contacts, talking to production and distribution companies, hiring localizers, and so on. Now all we had to do was find the right anime to introduce. This was the cause of much heated discussion, and we were somewhat limited by the power drain of our spirit-based multiversal internet connection. We had to find something that was entertaining, featured melee violence, but wasn't too mentally scarring. This last part was added after our test screening of Berserk caused 3 of the 6 Tau audience to start screaming and clawing out their eyes. That was bad, but the guy who started laughing really creeped us out. Still, these worlds had a solid mental health system, and the last we heard, the chances of the poor souls rejoining normal society would be high after a few years of gentle treatment. This also prompted a deep discussion about what was or was not considered a war crime, and if you could do one on accident. Finally, we settled on Rurouni Kenshin as a good starter for our would-be Xenos allies. So, needless to say, we had our minds on other things when we got some surprise visitors. Specifically, a pack of Kroot warriors. Or so we assumed. We didn't know much about Kroot, really. They had those weird bladed staff guns and were dressed in leather-like loincloths and vests. So, probably warriors. Critical was standing behind our counter, wearing his psyker robes, which we had been informed should circumvent a lot of interpersonal conflict, even if it came at the cost of friends and social acceptance. It did not, apparently, work on Kroot, as the 6 smelly, 7.5-foot-tall aliens advanced confidently on the probability-warping wizard and started chirping and cawing in their own language. When Critical greeted them with a hearty, "Welcome, friends," the one in front snarled, "Not your friend. Don't want you here. Should be gone." We took exception to that, and remarked that he wasn't exactly in his home system either. "Shut up. Too stupid to realize being threatened?" "You seem to be under the mistaken impression that you all are the threat here," Competence calmly replied. Unfortunately, the language barrier prevented her cool, calm demeanor from conveying the proper threatening tone. The creature did seem unsure about things, as all the apparently small, frail Terrans were not following the right script, but it wasn't smart enough to see the many red flags waving directly in its face. "You not get it. Leave now!" And it slammed its staff down on the counter, leaving a large dent in the wood and our security deposit. "Mother, we paid for that!" shouted Critical, as he lashed out with his specially made penance gauntlet. It was a power fist lined on the inside with small but sharp spikes, allowing him to use his self-damaging magic to alter the luck of his foes. As disturbing as that is, however, the magic wasn't really necessary. The alien apparently didn't know what a power fist was, and decided to take the metal gauntlet on the chin just to prove how tough he was. Then the power field activated just before contact, his entire beak disappeared, and the screaming started. Well, the screaming and the liquidy gurgling. It didn't last very long. Mill's attack was less bloody, but no less horrifying. She was a fan of Junji Ito, the body horror manga artist. So right after seeing his comrade threaten these silly humans, then get his face destroyed, one of the poor Kroot's minds was filled with haunting images of spirals. He collapsed to the fetal position and started rocking back and forth. She then turned back into the office and called the police, informing them that, "Yeah, this gang came into our office, and I'm not sure how many are going to make it out. You might want to send somebody." It turned out that this was unnecessary, as our hapless stealth-suited watchers were making a similar desperate call to their superiors in security. For her part, Competence looked at the bounty hunters, for such they were, and said, "I tried to tell you so." The Kroot closest to her, not speaking Gothic and taking this as some sort of insult, did its best to roar back at her. She sighed and shoved her transmogrification gun into its mouth, set the dial to IRS agent's heart, and fired a blast of pure cold, freezing the alien's lungs and upper chest from the inside out, but leaving his eyes free to swivel around in chilled horror. If that sounds harsh, She did, in fact, try to tell him so. Weeb had a similar attitude as he powered up with a life-infused martial stance, then jumped up, grabbed a Kroot by the hair, and started repeatedly punching him in the face, shouting, "You should have done more research!" Then Bard, empowered by his superheroes, did the heroic thing and punched through the frozen creature's chest. Well, he tried, but apparently flesh doesn't shatter cinematically like that. At least not unless you hit it really, really hard. So the poor guy's chest just started cracking and bits started dropping off. He looked panicked and slumped back into a corner, holding himself together as best he could and weeping quietly. Well, she just stabbed the closest Kroot right above the countertop, which happened to be right at alien groin level. We all stopped fighting for a second and told him that some things just weren't professional, and he should really re-examine his choices. There wasn't that much fight left in the alien bounty hunters after that. Not that it stopped us, but it did go pretty quickly. Do not meddle with the affairs of wizards, for they are subtle and quick to anger. We agreed with everything but the subtle part. Especially Weeb, who put the finishing touches on the fight by summoning his physical energy, boosting his legs, and diving at one of the bounty hunters. Except that he misjudged both his range and the magical juice he was using, and went clear through the creature, leaving a foul-smelling purplish mist floating in the air. Screw the physics, we have magic! At that point, the last few Kroot sensibly either surrendered in pants-wetting terror, or dashed straight through the plate glass window and went screaming down the street. Which was rather impressive because we had invested in ballistic glass. Several of our more sensitive members also noted that something in the Imperium was golf-clapping, so that was disturbing. But once the police and security forces arrived, then finished throwing up, we were able to claim clear self-defense. After all, our designated watchers had had a clear view through the windows as the bounty hunters came in, threatened us, damaged our properties, and were promptly self-defense to death. So legally we were in the clear. Also, for some reason, no one seemed very interested in antagonizing us. Strange, that. Anyway, we set about interrogating the semi-frozen Kroot. This first involved healing him, which first involved getting him to stop cringing away every time one of us moved towards him. Eventually, we made it clear we were trying to help, and he didn't really have a choice, and we restored him to full health. Good as new. Mostly. Aside from a fail-safe or two, but that never really came up, so did it really count? The only problem now was that he only spoke Kroot and Tau, and we only spoke variants of Gothic, by which I mean English. We tried to get some Tau to translate for us, but one look at the carnage that was our storefront, and they all turned an interesting shade of puce and dashed from the vicinity. The police actually threatened to charge us for the therapy bills if we kept trying to bring people into the room. In the end, we were shown how to upload some decent translation software onto our drone, and the police stood within sight but some ways away so they could ensure there wouldn't be any torture or similar unpleasantness. Turning to our Kroot interrogatee, we were pleased to discover that he wanted nothing more at this moment than to tell us everything he knew so we would let him go, and had actually been burbling secrets and information, between sobs, in his own language for the last few minutes. We made him start over, but we were nice enough to heal him some more first, although we made it clear that health was a very temporary state when dealing with easily irritated wizards. After some blubbing, the Kroot pulled himself together, figuratively and literally, and informed us that he had been hired by someone very high up. He didn't actually know who, because his leader had handled that. But his team, or whatever the collective noun of Kroot is, had been invited to a large office building downtown. His leader had gone up, and had come back down a little while later with a bag of money and the address of some uppity humans that people didn't want around anymore. He didn't know what the address of the building was either, except that it was downtown. I am given to understand that Kroot are often quite intelligent, even if they express it in different ways than other races. But apparently bounty hunters the universe over don't go into that line for critical thinking skills. Still, after some pressing, we were able to determine that the Tau who hired them was not a local, or the security office, just some high slit-head. Through an extended ritual and some fiddling around with mind magic, Mills, that guy, and Bard were able to enhance the alien's memory. But it didn't help much. Finally, someone suggested the name Onanoff, and the Kroot recognized it. It seemed incredibly odd that an Ethereal would deal personally with a pack of bounty hunters, So maybe it was some bizarre invitation to a meeting? If it was, we were kind of insulted, because he should have known we raided more than 6 lowly Xenos mercenaries. And if it was some sort of assassination attempt, we were really insulted, because he really should have known better. Well, she did some scrying, but couldn't get a more precise location than a block or so in the downtown area. So we decided for the direct route, packed our new recruit friend/captive into a large van, and drove around the area until he spotted a building he recognized. Having located our target, we started to plan our approach. We had more sense than to just barge straight in the front door. I mean, this was the base or offices of a freaking Tau Ethereal. It had to have incredible security and defenses. Or, as it turned out, maybe not. There was a coterie of fire warrior guards next to the Ethereal's actual office, no doubt supplied by O'Shaughnessy, but the rest of the building's security consisted of an IT guy watching monitors in a small room and 2 rent-a-cops sitting at the front desk. It was unbelievable. Literally, we didn't believe it, and spent about an hour quadruple checking, certain that there was some nefarious hidden network waiting to ensnare us. Finally, before our justifiable paranoia got the better of us, we put our plan into motion. With a bit of mystical cloaking, most of us weren't exactly nimble or stealthy people, but magical bullshit always helps. Several of us staked out nearby rooftops, such that we had a complete view of the building's exterior. Before too long, we identified a small service terminal on the outside of the building, in the alley around back behind some chain-link fencing. Then we just waited until a Tau Earthcast came out to do some basic maintenance. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait long, and were only halfway through planning some sort of technical issue to draw out a target when one of the IT department appeared. Moving sneakily, and helped by the fact that a random office worker on a peaceful planet doesn't expect to be assaulted by random humans, Critical moved up behind the Tau and gave him a light tap on the back of the head. Draping the now unconscious figure's arm over his shoulder, Critical stumbled back to our stakeout van with his drunk buddy, and no one in the middle of a downtown business district noticed. Magic! We were gentle with our captive. We didn't have anything against him. We just needed information. So we did our best to be careful when we tried to reach into his brain with mind magic and copy some technological know-how to Weeb. This was really some high-level magic, especially if we didn't want to damage the poor guy. Or Weeb, I suppose. And it was taking a lot of effort. Then Critical focused, popped his shoulder out of joint, and everyone in the van and reality itself cringed and allowed the magic to work. Entropy magic and general creepiness are a powerful combination. Also, it seemed more pleasant than Weeb trying to turn into a space marine and eating the poor schlub's brain. So, as the Tau dreamed of taking a test in school, but when he was acing, it wasn't a nightmare, we gathered his techie knowledge, put it in a little bundle, and slammed it into Weeb's skull. He passed out briefly, and when he woke up a moment later, he looked at us and whispered, "I know Kung Fu." "Yeah, you already did." "Shut up, it's a reference, let me have this." Now equipped with a better understanding of Tau tech, Weeb copied the IT guy's tablet, including permissions and other stuff, onto one of our own. We quickly magicked up a passable IT uniform for our mage, then Critical helped Weeb drag the Tau back into the alley and prop him up against a wall to enjoy the rest of his nap. We slipped a 20, or a Tau equivalent, into his shirt pocket as a thank you, and Weeb gave us access to the building's security network. It really was just a regular office building that the Ethereal worked from while he was in town. There was no security beyond what a normal office might have. Sure, it was technically a government building, but it was on the order of Office of Code Compliance. Apparently, despite the presence of a whole-ass Ethereal in their building, no one here even considered the possibility of an attack. This was disturbing, but as the old maxim goes, never interrupt your enemy when he is in the middle of making a mistake. So we rolled with it. First, we needed to get the building security and other employees out of the way. One scanned through the personal records, and we sent out an impromptu announcement that Becky was having a birthday party in the second-floor break room near the back. There would be cake and pizza. We signed at HR, certain that no HR director would fail to take credit for something that made people happy. This would handle any office workers and regular security guys. As for the elite guard, they may have been badass warriors, but they were still soldiers on guard duty. We knew a few soldiers. So we spoofed a message asking them to deal with a bunch of human teenagers who were spraying graffiti in the alley. We hinted that the drawings were especially amusing, as a bored soldier on guard duty will definitely go check out some crude, funny drawings. Soldiers are soldiers, after all. Welshie produced a can of spray paint through his magic bag, and Bard set about adding some verisimilitude to our story. He didn't actually know what Tau genitals looked like, so he just drew human genitals, but blue. He also added the word Tau and a pointing arrow just to make it clear. He also did one with a few spikes on and the word Kroot just for good measure. Once he had finished and gotten out, Weeb supplied the Fire Warriors with a slightly delayed video of Bard about his work, complete with anatomically inaccurate artistry. The guards chuckled and moved off to give a human a hard time. Which, again, should have worked just fine for normal soldiers on a normal guard assignment, but seemed unprofessional for guys guarding a ruling caste member. It was like everyone had taken an extra dose of stupid pills that morning. Then we met the Ethereal in person, and suddenly it all made sense. Our entrance was appropriately dramatic. Weeb was handling the technical aspects from the van, while Bard provided some external security, but the rest of us put on our best goon uniforms. Competence donned her official Inquisition outfit, along with the requisite floppy pilgrim hat, and we moved to the office door in formation. As we approached, there was a slight click as Weeb remotely unlocked the door, and a voice asked, "Oh, is there any cake left?" Then we kicked open the door. As Competence strode confidently into the large office, flanked by the rest of the party, the startled Tau looked up with a cry of, "Who the hell are you? Oh shit, it's you!" And he began to fall over his chair as he sought for something to hide behind and shouted for his guards. As he huddled beneath his desk, one hand reached up and started slamming into a large red button labeled Security, but Weeb had turned it off already. We let him do this for a while until he realized it wasn't going to work. Then he drew himself up and tried unsuccessfully to regain his dignity. When he asked what he could do for us, we turned the question back at him, and mentioned that it was discourteous to send Kroot bounty hunters when a polite letter would have done. He started to deny any involvement, but Weeb popped a video onto his desk terminal that showed our Kroot captive spilling the beans, and the Tau's face fell. "Well, yes, you see, I was just trying to encourage you to continue your vacation elsewhere. Maybe outside the Tau's sphere of influence? Back in your Imperium? Please go away." He seemed a bit uncertain when we said no. Then, without comment, Weeb started playing the recording of what had happened to the rest of the Kroot, and the Ethereal grew several shades paler. Something told us that honesty, or at least some lies tinged with honesty, might help settle things without any more violence, so Competence informed him that we couldn't just leave, even if we wanted to, because we had been given a command by the Emperor. You see, he actually likes you guys. He would prefer not to have to destroy you, but your inability to fight in honorable melee disturbs him, and may result in the damnation of your race. That seems an incredibly petty reason to commit genocide. I mean, what? Hey, when you control most of their galaxy, then you get to decide what is and isn't petty, Mills countered. So anyway, Competence continued, we came here to see if we could convince the Tau race to take up the sword and live. The Ethereal stared at us for a few minutes, confusion and disbelief written plainly across his face. That's it? That's all you want? I mean, there are some other things, but those are mostly petty details. The sword thing's the main bit. This makes no political sense whatsoever. We have cyclonic torpedoes. We don't have to make sense. Good point. Seeing an opening, Welshie pulled a working toy model of a lightsaber out of his bag. We owned Disney after all, and argued that the Tau could make their swords as fancy and technological as they wanted, they just had to stab people close up. This worked well, and we all saw On and Off's eyes light up as he saw the gizmo. Welshie waved it around some, and then smacked the desk with it, causing the toy to break and the Tau to deflate. Competence helpfully informed him that this was just a toy replica for our merchandising line, but we could certainly get blueprints to make real ones. Ooh, yes, I really want one of those. Wait, you said you were making more? For merchandise? Maybe, just perhaps, you would need a contact. to help bring these lovely, shiny toys and their accompanying ideology into the Tau Seps. Someone with political connections? Who would get a percentage of the net sales? And suddenly we all understood. The lack of security around this guy wasn't an issue of gross incompetence or divine luck. This ethereal was just a greedy idiot asshole, and there was a reason he'd been sent to a backwater border world far outside the Tau Empire. Hell, we decided after some discussion that O'Shaughnessy was either being punished for something or had been sent along with explicit orders to get this fool accidentally assassinated. I mean, given how good the Tau generally are at tech and security, there was almost certainly a reason this idiot had been left wide open. All of us having had bad managers, we felt a pang of sympathy for O'Shaughnessy. Still, this made our lives much easier. It helps when your cat's paw is a greedy, gullible moron. Much relieved by this discovery, we made some plans. Shop was talked, deals were made, bribes were slipped under the table, and we soon had a neat little contract to market lightsabers, anime, and melee violence to young, impressionable Tau children. With official ethereal endorsement. The whole joining the Imperium was a bit of a sticking point, though, even for this moron. Well, he could be bribed easily, but not so much the actually competent ethereals. But the idea of a non-aggression pact in the face of a tyrannid menace, along with some opening of borders, largely through the border worlds, some quasi-legal gray market stuff, and maybe even a cultural exchange or two, sounded very doable, with unification and cooperation as a long-term goal to work towards. The Emperor was immortal, and magic could control the very flow of time itself in the right hands, so we were cool with playing the long game. We left the building secure in the promise of our plan and the utility of our new stooge. This did not last long. In fact, it didn't make it 24 hours. We went back to our base and spent the rest of the day doing normal things. And by normal things, I mean that we blew a large chunk of our budget at the nearest liquor shop and had a raging party to celebrate the success of our first official mission. The morning came, as it comes to all, and most of us were still groaning and cursing the Daystar. Even those of our group who didn't partake in intoxicants had stayed up late watching Tau anime, hanging out with the silly drunks, and generally having a good time. We were, however, all in our 30s, so while we could still party like we used to, the recovery period was much worse. Some of us had life magic to deal with the hangovers, but most of the life mages had blinding headaches and therefore had trouble working the healing spells. Truly a bitter cycle of pain and poor choices. Anyway, as most of us were stubbornly trying to deny consciousness, there was a blaring alarm from the street outside, and an even more blaring voice, filtered through speakers, demanded, "Sarker Guela, surrender now to the authority of the Tau Empire, for the greater good." We pulled ourselves to the window and saw 3 Tau crisis battlesuits, arranged with overlapping fields of fire, aimed at our front door. We were suddenly much more sober. Sober and hungover, that is. In a frantic voice, Weeb gave us some basic info on the capabilities of these walking tanks, and made it very clear that fight was not really an option. Another loud hail was issued, along with some unkind remarks about Imperial psychers, as we tried to figure out what to do. The Tau sounded like they had missed their morning coffee, and were looking forward to shooting some human freaks. So we went with an ill-conceived Plan B, not having enough time to make a decent Plan A. After collecting some specifics about their construction, because Weeb had been a tabletop player before all this nonsense, Competence gathered Welshie, Mills, and Critical to enact some shenanigans. Unfortunately, she needed a distraction. Weeb and Bard, being born theater kids, took it upon themselves to provide one. Grabbing a half-full bottle left over from the night before, Bard helped himself to some hair of the dog, while Weeb held his head and groaned. No acting required. And the pair stumbled out into the street, cursing loudly in the daylight. Sloshing haphazardly, Bard staggered up to the war suits standing in the street, the other 2 flanking him from atop nearby buildings, and in his friendliest voice, attempted to offer him a drink. Better to be seen as an annoying fool than an actual threat, especially if you are an actual threat. For his part, Weeb went full fanboy and started rattling off technical specs about the armor, the guns, the strapping system, As the irritated Tau officer tried to deal with a hostile force that wasn't apparently hostile, but was very annoying, Weeb staggered and pumped raw forces magic into the armor's electronics system, causing a glitch in its friend or foe system. The other two suits didn't immediately open fire, their pilots not being absolute cretins, but the entire group was now being distracted by random pings and pop-ups that they had to keep dismissing. While we were subjecting the enemy to the death of 1,000 gnats, Competence was doing a complicated ritual involving matter magic, alchemy, certain advanced chemical polymers, and dairy products. Crystals were arranged, circles were chalks, chants were chanted, dances were danced, and Critical started slamming his hand with a hammer. Long story short, the nice Tau officer was doing just fine, trying to politely arrest the stupid human drunks, who didn't seem to understand what was happening, when suddenly his super-advanced, high-tech battlesuit started screeching and smoking and blasting damage alarms. Then the smell hit him. You see, all the rubberized, Tau rubber, but still, joints in his suit had suddenly, spontaneously, become Greek yogurt. This, of course, caused large swaths of his armor to cease functioning, but it also introduced hot dairy products into the middle of his armor. His working, powered armor. His hot, working, powered armor. Imagine the smell of several pounds of baking, curdling yogurt hitting you all at once, as you're trapped in a sealed metal casket that no longer opens properly. Do not trifle in the affairs of wizards. From the outside, the armor didn't fall over and explode or anything. It just slumped dramatically as all the joints became semi-liquid. This also resulted in a blast of hot yogurt to the face for Weeb and Bard. There's a sex joke in there, but I'm too classy to make it here. We were not, for the record, too classy to make it in real life, however. Other than this, the only signs of success that could be noticed was the muted blare of damage alarms from within the suit's pilot compartment, followed shortly by a lot of retching and moaning. Also, apparently the dark gods of the 41st millennium have a twisted sense of humor, or we didn't gauge our magic correctly, or something, because with the help of Welshie's correspondence magic amplifying the effect, we managed to hit 2 of the 3 suits. The final crisis suit stood in shocked silence, its guns hanging low as its pilot tried to make sense of what the readouts were saying. This was not helped by the glitches we had caused earlier, and the garbled, mush-mouthed communications of his comrades. His puzzlement lasted long enough for that guy, looking out of the window, to get into his head. It took next to no effort to convince him that this sort of bullshit was the very thing that officers had been invented for, and he promptly stomped in a 180-degree circle and took off in the direction of his base to make this someone else's problem. Apparently, "I don't get paid enough for this" translates across cultures. Several of us also noticed that there were a handful of stealth operatives lurking at the ends of the street, presumably in support of the big guns. We decided to try to seem helpful and friendly, figuring that if it didn't convince them to back off in itself, the tonal whiplash between slinging cosmic wrath and inviting them to tea might confuse things enough to allow us to take advantage. Once Weeb and Bard had finished their own vomiting, they began the rescue operations. Crowbars were retrieved until several of the party members remembered that we were mages with matter magic, and that worked much faster. Some super strength spells were also employed, just so we could dramatically rip the armor cover off, further disincentivizing the stealth suits. We retrieved the 2 traumatized pilots from the vileness of their compartments and took them into our offices to get cleaned up. We had rented apartments above the shop, so showers and washing machines were readily available. Once they were cleaned up, the Tau asked us what had happened, but were apparently more than happy to accept a muttered, "Psyker bullshit, don't worry about it." They were also more than happy to tell us everything about their boss, who had sent them into this situation with no warning about the kind of nonsense we could pull. Actually, they resisted at first, until we asked if their bosses had shown them the video. When they asked, "What video?" we played them the recording of what happened to the Kroop mercenaries. After the battlesuit pilots had time to recover, it was their pleasure to turn on the bastard. They were also kind enough to call off the rest of their attack squad. Yeah, it turns out, On and Off had given them personal direct orders to capture the rogue human psychers, apparently bypassing O'Shaughnessy's normal chain of command, much to the Fire Warrior's chagrin. Some more discussion was had, and it was decided once again that by arrest their superiors had actually meant invite, and that we definitely had some words to exchange with the ethereal. So some transport was arranged, and we rode with the suit pilots back to On and Off's office. As we walked in, we saw that security had been upgraded. There were now 3 guys sitting at the front desk. They didn't even look up from their coffee as we strolled to the elevators. We walked into the office as the ethereal rose to his feet and announced, "Ah, at last! The mighty Guelas Psychers have been brought to see me. It is so nice to finally meet you." His haughty demeanor curdled a bit when Competence flopped into one of his chairs and propped her feet on the desk. "It's typically more polite to send a written invitation." "Invitation? What?" "To this meeting." "Meeting? What the hell?" Turning to the fire warriors, he asked, "They do know they're under arrest, right?" Before our new friends could get in trouble, Weeb helpfully added, "I think there's cake left in the break room from the party yesterday. You guys might get on that." A very confused ethereal asked, "Wait, how did you know about the party?" "It was Becky's birthday." "How do you know about Becky?" "Everybody knows Becky. Becky's awesome. Why don't you guys just get out of here and we'll talk to your boss?" The ethereal continued to sputter as the warriors left to get some cake. Finally, the ethereal pulled his comm and ordered a security check on Becky as a possible leak. Weeb pulled out his own device, put on his HR voice, and responded, "Gotcha. She's in the clear. All good," and gave a look at the Tau. Really, it was a good bit of intimidation. On anyone else, it would have worked just fine. But we could also see the emptiness behind the Tau's glassy eyes. He looked back and forth a few times before finally putting 2 and 2 together and realizing there was a problem, but he was more confused than scared. "How did you do that? Who are you people?" "Buddy, who the hell convinced you this was a good idea?" Competence asked. It was for the greater good. I thought we had settled all this yesterday." "Yesterday? What are you talking about?" This comment led to some confusion on our part, for a change. Some back and forth led to the Tau insisting that he had never seen us before, and we had not been in the building yesterday. We were convinced, for a number of mystical reasons, that he was telling the truth, or at least what he thought was the truth. So we asked him to pull up the security recordings from the cameras all around his office, and when he did, it showed the ethereal alone, reading dirty magazines, napping, and practicing his putting game. All typical boss stuff. No human psychers or empire-spanning subversion. This led to some deeply existential questions on our part, and a lot of paranoid guessing about who could be powerful enough to screw with reality around us. Then that guy reminded everyone that Weeb had made a copy of the ethereal's computer the day before, and we checked our own version of the recordings. In those, we definitely showed up, and were seen talking to and shaking hands with the upper caste idiot. Not a great idea to record your own nefarious meetings, but his stupidity was our gain in this instance. So we hadn't been screwed with, he had. Good to know. Now we just had to figure out who and how. We showed our videos to On and Off and persuaded him to let us take a poke into his mind. We did have to be careful because, as Bard pointed out, we were playing the ethereal cast's game in their own house. But we did have 3 pretty potent mind mages between Bard, Mills, and that guy. Some careful poking and prodding was able to reveal that the Tau had, in fact, been the subject of mental manipulation, which process was no doubt helped by the fact that the man was an idiot. Not just manipulation, though, but mind magic, of the kind that we used, but with something else added that we couldn't quite identify. We tried to tell the ethereal, but he refused to believe us, until we just brute forced it and fractured his mental state a bit, so that he remembered both versions of the previous day, but was driven just a tiny bit insane. No, well, little insanity never hurt anyone. And nothing of value was lost. We did make a note to tell O'Shaughnessy or someone responsible not to let him near any sharp spoons, though. More than anything, the fact that all 3 of us couldn't thoroughly restore the dolt suggested how powerful the original mage was. When he survived the experience, more or less, On and Off started to believe us, at least a little. We gave him the Cliff Notes version of our proposition from the day before, but we were much more interested in what had happened afterward. Looking through the rest of his daily calendar, we saw that he had requested a meeting shortly after our departure. Going to a nearby empty room, since we didn't trust the ethereal not to get brainwashed again, we pulled up the video and had our drone projected onto the wall. The video was basically the futuristic space version of a Zoom meeting. We saw the camera showing on and off in the corner, then another figure joined the meeting. Our favorite idiot started talking, blathering on about the new human plan, while the other Tau sat in silence and said nothing, until On and Off himself trailed off into silence. As we watched the exchange of nothing, several of us started to feel weird. Like we wanted to work for the larger benefit of the maximum number of people, or something like that. It was subtle, and it hit some of us worse than others, but we all started to kind of nod along to the suddenly compelling silence. Mills, one of our mind mages, immediately started shouting, "Oh, fuck!" and slapped the drone's camera. Some of us were able to shake off the effects, and they were able to help the rest. We were puzzled. We didn't think ethereals could do that kind of thing over a space Zoom call, especially a recorded one. Wasn't their whole deal pheromones? Yeah, in fact, the Tau couldn't do that. It was specifically mind magic. That meant either someone from our world had come into 40K, or our presence here had altered how magic worked. Either had terrifying implications. On the plus side, we had all the technical data from the meeting, so it didn't take too much to pinpoint the Tau individual who had put the whammy on us. And on and off too, but who cares about that? There was some backtracking and some basic encryption, and we probably would have had some real trouble, except that we had complete access to one end of the secured line. Thank the gods for idiots in high places. It wasn't long before we had pinpointed our quarry, a particularly highly placed ethereal named Naruto. Oh, Naruto. When Weeb told us the name, there was a mighty groaning and a collective, "Oh no," and we decided the invader had to be punished for that name alone. Well, at least we knew he was from our corner of the multiverse, and was probably a powerful mind, and maybe life, mage, who had somehow transformed himself into a Tau. We were discussing what to do with this new information when the ethereal's futuristic alien email notification dinged. The message header, "Hey guys," seemed a bit odd, so Weeb and Mills, exercising caution, turned the tablet away from the rest of the debating party and opened it. It was a few moments before Welshie noticed that the pair had gone stiff and were drooling slightly. He did his best to knock the Tau tablet out of their grip, but that didn't help anything, and instead he got a good look and likewise went rigid. The rest of us closed our eyes, or were lucky enough to be facing away, and weren't caught by the effect. Competence suggested smashing the device, but a quick mystic check of our party members confirmed that their minds were trapped, and destroying the tablet would destroy them. The only way to get them out of the strange thing was to go in after them. We weren't idiots, though, and happened to work for some very scary people with some very big guns. So we sent a quick message back to the O Imperator Quare, saying, "Gone to interdimensional mindscape to find wizard. Not back in 2 hours. Please glass planet." Having done our due diligence, the rest of the party huddled around the tablet, turned it over, and went for a trip. That guy waited until last, and took the opportunity to pose our bodies in embarrassing positions. And we all found ourselves standing on a platform floating in the middle of a bubble of empty space, surrounded by swirling colors and half-suggested figures that it hurt to look at. It didn't take a genius to realize we were in some sort of bubble in the warp. No doubt caused by the Tau standing in front of us. Well, Tau was only a surface suggestion. The guy was clearly some sort of human mage from our neck of the woods, given the personal mind dimension we were in. Remember, we used to be nigh omnipotent wizards before someone screwed up the timeline, so we at least recognized the technique. Also, most Tau aren't built like brick shithouses. Seriously, the guy looked like Vin Diesel or The Rock, but with one of those fishy-looking blue faces on top. Of course, someone said this out loud, and our foe was immediately dubbed Vin Diesel. He did not see the humor in this. Of course, this too wasn't entirely true. The Tau looked sort of fuzzy, and if you placed your hand over one eye and squinted, the massively muscled alien was replaced with a short, obese, pimply man with a Leaf Village headband and the king of all neckbeards. "Welcome, noble Imperials, to my arena of—" "You know what? Screw it. Who the fuck are you people, and what are you doing in my playground?" he fumed. "We're the owners of the Walt Disney Corporation. We have recently acquired the title to Games Workshop and all subsequent rights and properties, and are here to enforce a cease and desist. This is a magical takedown notice," Competence shouted back. This threw the mage a bit. Interdimensional warriors and alien armies is one thing, but Disney lawyers are a whole nother level of evil. Well, this is parody and fair use, and I'm just going to kill you, so there. With this, the posturing ended, and we started to advance for a fight. Until Weeb finally noticed where we were, looked at Bard and Competence, the spirit mages, and started shouting, No, dude, you don't know what you've done. Please, for God's sake, just give up now. But no one ever listens, no matter how hard you try to help him. For his part, Bard began Operation Win Stupid Prizes by shuffling to the edge of the platform, turning away from the massive Tau, sitting down and starting to mumble to himself. The rest of us figured he had some cunning plan and left him to it. We would make sure the neckbeard Tau was occupied, since he was clearly enough of a weeaboo to recognize a spirit bomb-type maneuver. Well, she and that guy had been partially affected by our antagonist's mind whammy, but the new surroundings were shocking enough to help them shake it off pretty easily. That guy decided to return the favor with an image of the horrible daughter-dog hybrid from Fullmetal Alchemist. It didn't have quite the intended effect, as the neckbeard started to laugh, but he was at least distracted for the moment. Critical, taking advantage of this, dashed to the attack. Hearing the pounding of feet, the enemy wizard looked up from his reveries, saw Critical, and started to raise his arms in a panicked defense. This left his lower body wide open, and Critical dove Superman style into the alien's knee. Except that, as we had more or less guessed, the Tau body was a mental manifestation covering its true form, which was much shorter, placing the illusory knee right about the level of his real groin, which impacted with a power fist that also acted as a magical entropy focus. So the poor nerd got hit right in the crotch with the rage-fueled speed of a large man wearing a power fist. And then reality wobbled, and the bad damage became the worst-case scenario. As a former time mage, that guy was actually able to observe a ripple in the weave of reality, as the neckbeard's entire line of descendants were spontaneously erased from the timeline. The Tau wasn't dead, but the fight was definitely out of him. This was fortunate, as our entire party cringed in sympathetic pain at what Critical had done, even the ladies. We weren't finished, though, and a lesson had to be taught. I'm not sure what lesson exactly, but we were going to learn this sucker good. Weeb quickly moved over to the Tau and surveyed the damage with his life magic and medical knowledge. Then, as the neckbeard started to wheeze and mutter, Okay, Weeb asked, How about now? Channeled his power and lightly stroked the wizard's cheek, thereby transforming all of the pain-blocking endorphins coursing through his bloodstream into adrenaline. And then the screaming really started. We felt bad for the guy. Really, we did. But that didn't stop us for more than a second or two. When you try to mug a monster, you deserve everything you get. Specifically, what you get is an absurdly large book of copyright law, delivered to the cranium at terminal velocity, Acme Anvil style, by Welshie's correspondence magic. Competence, deciding that this counted as fair legal warning, pulled out an aged scroll of unpleasantly familiar leather, took a sharpened quill from her pocket, cut a small slit in her arm, dipped the pen in blood, scratched out the name, Robert J. Downing Smythe, Esquire, and began shouting in eldritch legalese. With a puff of brimstone, a small, dapper man with a bald spot, a briefcase, and a very thin watch appeared, and placed a hand on the now catatonic Tau wizard. With a smile that chilled even the most merciless of us to our core, he thanked us for our patronage, and assured us that the multiversal court took intellectual property rights very seriously. Then, with another small cloud, he vanished. You see, in our previous adventures, we had retained the services of some vampire lawyers, because Bard had grown up listening to the song Lawyers, Guns, and Money, and took it to heart. And since then we had been passed along to their senior partners in the lowest nether regions. Lovely people, really. Wonderful Christmas parties. Having dispatched the interloper, we took stock of ourselves. No damage whatsoever. A flawless victory. It was really kind of anticlimactic, especially for our irritated DM. Then we turned around and spotted Bard still up to his tricks and shook him out of his reverie. When asked what he had done, he said that since we were clearly in some sort of warp-adjacent mind dimension, he had decided for a simple solution. Basically, he used his spirit magic to shout into the warp, "Hey, this guy says swords are for pussies," and then just stood there like a giant neon sign pointing toward our intended victim. As he finished explaining that, we heard a horrible scratching noise and looked up to see dozens of demons, their fiery red faces pressed against the dome of the bubble dimension, breathing heavily and clawing slowly at the barrier. There was also one large, hairy human male, but we decided not to worry about that. About this time, the Mind Mages pointed out that the Tau had been sustaining this weird place, and since he was gone, maybe we should be too. Fortunately, it wasn't too hard to find the portal we had been sucked through and get it to work in reverse, and then close it up behind us once we were in real space. We were pretty sure the warp entities couldn't follow us through. Pretty sure. And if they could, we should be long gone before they became any real problem, so it was basically the same thing. And thus, victory was declared. This didn't end our job, but things did get a lot more relaxed. To prove that we weren't complete incompetents and or sociopaths, our spirit mages spent the next weeks jetting around the planet and thickening the veil, i.e. making any warpy stuff harder, to protect our investment. And the innocent people, I suppose. We also ironed out plans with General Weeaboo, Onanoff, and the various necessary groups to ensure the success of Operation Animus. Plus, we discovered that, somehow, our fight with the Mind Mage in his own dimension had enhanced everyone's ability with the sphere. At least a little bit. Beyond that, and that guy spending time with his new Tau girlfriend, nothing particularly eventful happened. After a fairly relaxing working vacation, we returned to the O Imperator Quare, pleased with our success and with very healthy egos. Our good mood stopped as soon as we walked into the briefing room and saw Inquisitor Sarge's face, along with the several guardsmen holding down Twitch while he spasmed and threatened to blow us all up before we could get everyone killed. Then, the grumpy non-com turned Inquisitor handed us our new mission briefing. Orcs. Why did it have to be orcs? End of Chapter 2. Thank you everybody for listening. Again, this is a longer one, several weeks worth of missions going into it. I hope you enjoyed the somewhat anticlimactic boss fight. It was fun to play in game because, as the DM, it had been years since we played Mage, and like I DM'd it last time and remembered what the power levels were like, and yeah, I remembered. Oh yeah, no more individual bosses because everybody just one shots him. They all gang up, and he didn't even get a turn. It was brutal. Stun-locked him, punched him in the balls, eradicated his ability to reproduce, and then murdered him with demon lawyers. Just, it was so one-sided, it was kind of beautiful in its way. But yeah, from here on out, much bigger battles, more guys. Horde mechanics, that's the thing for 40k. Had to remind myself. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Stick around for the next time where we get up to some orky shenanigans. See you next time. Take care. Bye.